Remember.
Okay.
Okay. Welcome to another edition of Unlocking Astrology. You know, Sam and I start talking before I hit record, and I'm like, we missing all the good stuff. I'm hitting record, brother. So Samuel Reynolds, the founder of Unlock Astrology. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's good to be back.
Yes, it's good to have you back. We were talking off mic about the passing of DMX and also the Derek Chauvin trial, which you did a chart on. DMX passed at the time that we're taping this today, officially, even though there have been so many different iterations since he had a heart attack on April 2nd, 2021. What does the chart say?
Well, I haven't looked at his astrology. I mean, and I'll talk about briefly my own take related to that. I was just talking about this on Twitter. I don't do astroforensics immediately after someone passes. You know, I can go into some of that, just briefly. I know there's some listeners who are very much into, and viewers who are very much into, like, blah, 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 King, Prince Philip died, blah, blah, blah. And they start talking about the chart or, whatever. My take is, unless we're talking about you predicted it or I saw it, blah, 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 just shut up. Like you didn't, what are you talking about it for now? Like you saw it. Now the charts clearly see here, looking at Saturn positioned here, that this person would be dealing with death, but shut up. You didn't do it. You didn't do that work. It didn't happen. So I'm not going to go into that. And I know that sounds very crass and maybe even somewhat brutal. But
you're a Scorpio.
I am a Scorpio. I guess that comes through. So, I mean, I'm not going to do that. I guess for me, I do know we're going to talk about some general things. I know he's a Sag, right? He's December 18th. And I think, for me, it's thinking about who he has been, in terms of hip hop, and then I start thinking something you and I have talked about briefly, just about the Black people dying. I mean, particularly, yes, as a man, I'm going to be sensitive to it as, another Black man dying. And, initially people were talking about, he died from an overdose. But I think the clearest thing we can say is that he died from a heart attack right now. We don't know his cause of death. But just talking about Black men and their health, considering the health crisis I just had, is on my mind. And so one of the things I think about related to astrology is, even though I'm not a medical astrologer, that's not my expertise. There's some people who specialize in that. They can talk about what herbs to take, what particular things related to particular issues that you're having. But I think it's important to know those things. That's why I think it's, as an astrologer, or as if you see a medical astrologer, and for Black people to be more conscious about themselves and their health and what they're doing related to that. So, just thinking about DMX, I know he found Jesus, but did he find his health? So that's all.
And even in, because we were also talking a little religion as we head into the season of Ramadan at the filming of this. A lot of people believe that, let me change the view here, that, because you find Allah or God or Jesus or Buddha, that you now are a different human being. I mean, the goal is to be better, but it doesn't mean that you aren't, weak or sick, or, because addiction is a sickness, that you overcome all sickness. I think that finding religion is not a cure for what ails you. It should be a centering,
right?
Or, or a guide to how you should be living your life. But I don't think it's a cure if you're not doing the work to fix yourself.
That's absolutely correct. I think, one of the things that we talk about in Islam is that, is that God may give you a camel, for instance, but tie your camel up, right? Take care of it, and it's the same thing with your body, that you have this body and all these ways by which you can enjoy the benefits of being alive, but that requires you being attentive to it. So, and people think like, well, Jesus is going to heal me. I mean, maybe, but the other part of that is, you also healing yourself by, taking care of your body, getting enough sleep, drinking water, all these other things that become important. And, we're losing, people who've been the hallmark of our generation, and a lot of them have been Black men. I mean, obviously there's some Black women up, as well, but in terms of what we're talking about with hip hop, just within the last 5-10 years, these people who we thought maybe we would be watching them at 70, we're not.
God rest the dead, rest in power. This is not the time to perform an autopsy on somebody's life. I think,
That's true. Yeah, that's one of the things I was saying too. I'm
Yeah.
not going to look at that astrologically and go like, well, this is what DMX, was going through in this, but because one, I believe, let him get in the ground. It's not time to open that up. Yes, I mean, we can always talk about the responsibility we have, but in the interim, we have to mourn.
So shall we? Speaking of mourning, I'm still emotionally watching the trial of Derek Chauvin, struggling with finding sense of the lack of humanity in the act of taking the life of George Floyd. I'm struggling with finding my center around, because I know that Derek Chauvin is not an anomaly. I know he's not an anomaly. I know that, he's not an anomaly because the other couple of cops were in lockstep with what he was doing. They participated. So this trial, to me, is the trial of the century. I think it is America on trial. I feel like her criminal justice system, her police system is on trial. What do you agree or not? And what did the chart say?
No, well, I don't agree, but for a slightly different reason than I think what I'm mining is your intention. If you allow me to share, yeah. I can show you the charts that I have in mind. All right. I have some good news for you related to that. But in terms of where did you share? Give me the power, Karen.
Yeah, you got the power. You got the power. You got the power.
Right, you remember that? Let me share their two charts, because I'm going to also be looking at. We do not have a birth time for Derek, right? Can you see the two wheels that I'm seeing on my screen? Okay, so the outer wheel is his trial, and then his inner wheel is his chart, which I'll explain. But first, let me answer why I don't completely agree with you. I don't think this is the trial per se of the century. I don't think that this is, the police on trial. Partly because the deeper work that is necessary for reallocating the powers of the police will go far beyond what's happening with a trial, right? We have to start thinking about, and I've been saying this on Twitter for years, we have to fundamentally start rethinking how the police even have their power, starting at the charter level, like the charter that they use. So for example, we elect sheriffs, and that goes back hundreds of years, even back at something that we're inheriting or we inherited from British law, right? So we elect that, we participate in that process. We don't have anything like that for the police. A police chief can be carried on from administration to administration. And this is almost universal throughout this country, at least. And so what that means is that the police have locked in a level of authority that doesn't hold them to any particular elected process or official. Maybe the mayor. But again, as New York clearly demonstrates, you can have, discrepancy between the police and the mayor, right? So, I mean, it's far deeper than that. So that's where I disagree, but I understand what you're saying, that it's bringing to full relief. So what's the net though? What can we expect? So one of the things that was illuminating for me looking at the chart, because I told you I hadn't looked at the chart when we last talked, is I do think he is going to get convicted. I think I'm pretty clear, not just from listening to the trial, but looking at his chart, that his chickens have come home to roost, right? And I'm talking about specifically Derek Chauvin. I think there's clear preponderance of evidence, and will be a preponderance of evidence that will mete out his justice. And one striking feature for those who know some astrology and those who don't, that I can at least point out, is that I'm looking at Derek Chauvin's Saturn in Cancer, right, at 26 degrees. Now, you may be like, well, what does that mean? Blah, blah, blah. Won't get too deep into that, just to say that that's the location of it. We can look on the opposite end. Pluto is at 26 degrees Capricorn, the exact opposite. So Pluto, we can call him the Grim Reaper. We can call him where we kind of dig in and experience depth. You know, some people have associated Saturn, this opposite planet, with the idea of karma. With Pluto being mostly toward the exact same degree in opposite place for Derek Chauvin, this is a reckoning time. He is dealing with some aspect of profound reckoning. So, you know, whether that becomes life in prison or whatever, you know, 20 years, he's not, I don't believe he's getting off. This is kind of like, yeah, the buck stops here. I think you've even talked about it like, yeah, dude, you're going to be a sacrificial lamb. And I think there's some measure of truth to that, that I'm seeing that really testifies that, like, you know, we're going to make an example of you. And I think my concern is, I think that's going to be important. We might see that, you know, in terms of we being in the community as a win. And I'm also going to say on some level it is, but I hope that incentivizes us to stay more on top of the police and not go for short-term fixes like, oh, well, they need more training. You know, like I was thinking about that. When you have a wild animal, and I am saying this, I may offend some of your viewers who are in law enforcement, but y'all wilding.
Pause for a second. Because when people get offended, is because it usually, what do they say, a hit dog yells, or
yeah, that's true. But you know, I'm recognizing,
you know, like I always say, if somebody walks in the room and yells out "bitch," I'm not turning around, because you're definitely not talking to me. So,
right. Well, I recognize people's feelings, but so I'm going to say, you know, this directly. You know, the police, law enforcement, they're wilding for all the reasons I talked about last time. So you can't fix a wild thing by keeping them in a wild place. You're going to have to bring them in, corral them, domesticate them in some way that makes sense. That's not going to happen with cameras, which I predicted even 8 years ago with body cams. I was like, that's not going to change them or change the police. It's not going to happen with coming up with civilian police boards. It's not going to happen with, you know, diversity training and giving more training for. It's literally going to be like, who do these people answer to, including starting from the head, right? And how do we kind of think about policing that ties into the sense of community and respecting community, right? If those things don't happen, there won't be any change to the police, and the police will know that they don't have any reason to change. Why would they? They understand their dimension of power. So anyway,
that makes sense.
What I see in terms of, you know, particular things that are happening with this chart, again, just to reiterate, we do not have a birth time for Derek Chauvin. One of the things that struck me is that you were talking a little bit at the start of it, when we were talking and prepping to come on, about him, you know, like a little bit, you know, and I think I thought about that, like, what is up with this dude? Right. You know, and that even his wife was kind of like, yeah, I'm done. He's a bad man. Right. You know, whatever. He has a Sun Mars square. Let me explain that a little bit. So his sun is, he's born on the very last day of Pisces, almost in, you know, not the cusp, but he's almost into Aries. Right. His Mars had just gone into Cancer a few days before, or a day before. Now, what does that mean practically? It means when you have sun, and we talked about square, that's an aspect when the planets have a particular relationship to each other. So they have a dynamic tension that really highlights really strong feelings, emotions, and a need for action. Derek, I believe from his chart, has a strong need to prove himself, to prove his mettle in almost a militaristic way. Like, I don't remember, I haven't looked so much into his life. I don't know if he's done some, service, if he was in the military, but
The police for 19 years or something, 19
right.
years.
So
I mean, shoot.
he, and the police are effectively a military. They also cull people from the military. That's
Mhm.
one of the reasons why they have made some dramatic changes from like, the first part of the last century to you look at them now, right? So when you have that sun Mars and he's a moon in Scorpio, this is a man who has a desperate need to prove himself in any particular situation. So what that means practically is that he often is going to go toward a certain extreme. So this is, if I were his astrologer, not now, I mean, before he had been killing people and maiming and hurting people, I might have talked about his anger issues. And one of the things that he would need to work on and really address, and then his need to prove himself in a particular way to kind of demonstrate like, I can be worthy. I mean, that's also tying in with his moon in Scorpio, looking for worthiness. So this is kind of the moment of reckoning for him, dealing with that. I, obviously his defense attorney is trying to get him off on some level. I think he also wants to get off, but I think this is a moment where, he has to deal with facing the music. The sun and Venus were conjoined together the day the trial started, directly opposite to his Pluto. Again, Pluto's in the mix. I've talked to your audience before about the nature of Pluto as America's going toward its Pluto return. Pluto is a planet that's kind of like the buck stops here. I want the truth. It's like, I have to remember and look at your chart at some point, Karen, where I think you've got strong Pluto in your chart. Like, let's dig in. Let's go for the real meat. You're muted.
Yeah, you never read my chart.
I looked at your chart.
You look.
You
Oh, you
remember?
looked at it and then you lost it. That's
Right.
right, because you were in the studio and I gave you my information.
And I didn't remember it.
And you,
So
and you lost it, and now you can't find it. And
good for you.
well.
You glow.
So wait, I have Pluto.
I suspect. I'm saying I suspect you have strong Pluto, where Pluto is active in your chart, because that's what Pluto's about. So again, we're dealing with this similar kind of issue of kind of getting beneath the surface, not just in terms of what he's facing in terms of the trial, but also in terms of, I hope this is a point of reckoning for him within himself, introspection. Now, again, I don't emotionally, I don't care really. Like you could do whatever.
I was gonna say, does it matter at this point?
Right. I don't care
whether he reckons with himself. Like,
well, I'm thinking, from a humane or point of view in terms of recognizing his humanity, but for me, I don't care.
okay.
Like he could come to me and say, like, well, Sam, now I see better. Like, that's great. That won't bring George back. But yeah, whatever.
Right. Okay. So the trial outcome, you believe is going to be, I believe that he was going to be found guilty as well. But
Yeah.
now the charts speak to this.
Yeah, that's my reading of it, right?
Nothing on the other officers, because when you do a chart like this, because I'm looking at a bunch of symbols, some
right?
I recognize, some I don't. So when you look, you show me Pluto, something looks like Virgo. I see some Virgo. I see that looks like a Taurus or something.
I don't see any Virgo. You may be looking at these.
The M's, the three M's. Oh, those are Scorpios. Okay.
There's a Scorpio.
That confused because
Virgo's over here.
Okay, Scorpio and Virgo, the M, they look very similar.
Yeah, the glyphs do. So there's one that's, and they're more recent in astrological history, but the tail that goes in, supposedly related to Mary, and the Virgin, right? And then the tail that goes out is more related to the scorpion sting.
Okay. And the horseshoe looking thing.
Oh, these are the nodes. So these are called the lunar nodes. And so it is powerful that we have the south node over his Neptune. Again, that's kind of the bubble bursting. And maybe him kind of, like I said, the bubble bursting, not just on his malfeasance for years, and in this particular case, but perhaps even for him.
And the male and female symbols that are...
Well, that's Mars and Venus.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. So this is Mars in his natal chart. This is Venus. So he's a very weak Mars. but he has a strong Venus. And you might say, well, what might that mean? Well, when you have a strong Venus the way he may have it, it can come with a certain sense of entitlement where he feels, and this can happen, especially with the lifestyle of some cops, where the lifestyle or the means, especially being on the force for 19 or 20 years, supports a lifestyle that can be somewhat lavish, or where you can have the nice things. Like I would say he probably enjoys having nice things, wants nice things in life.
Did he have that house in Florida and a boat and this other
Okay,
stuff?
these are things I didn't know, but I would imagine that this is
Okay.
someone that he would want nice things in life, and that he sees a way of having these nice things.
Now, the 69, does that mean that he's performing cunnilingus on himself?
Oh, wow. No,
Okay.
this is just
I don't know.
Cancer. It's just Cancer.
Oh, okay. I didn't know. Sorry, Cancers.
Yep, I know. I mean, Cancers get it for 69. They get it for the disease. I have to be careful when I mention Cancer talking about a chart, because some people are like, I got Cancer. And I'm like, no, it's just a sign.
Okay. And finally, I don't even know how to describe it. I think this is the Taurus right near Neptune in the 0 degree and number one. And the number one, I think that at the end, that Taurus within the one.
You mean here?
Quadrant? Yeah. Is that
this is all Pisces?
No, and move over one. To
Okay.
one. Just take the one all the way down. Take it all the way down to the end. What are the middle quadrant and the outer quadrant, right? Quadrant, not the circle. The outer circle. What is that symbol above Neptune?
Above Neptune, right here. This is Mercury.
Yeah, that's Mercury. Okay.
Now that's fascinating, because what you are recognizing is that if we, you see the symbol for the horns and you see the circle, but then you have to count in like what's called the body. Now, in esoteric astrology, there's a whole breakdown of what each of these glyphs mean related to spirit. So what is said is that we have the horns as almost like an antennae or the crescent, where you can intuitively perceive things, to the wholeness of spirit, which is that glyph of the circle, into the body of matter, which is the cross. So those three things. So that's interesting that this is actually Taurus over here, but it looks like that circle with the horn. So, maybe that's an interesting tie, but Taurus is an earth sign.
And of all of the 12 little pies, houses, as you mentioned early on, we all have all of the zodiac.
Yeah.
So this is a manifestation of that, where I see just about every single sign in all of the 12, what'd you call them?
Signs and houses. So these are
houses.
Yeah, these particular divisions are houses, but related to the sign. So this is a good example. So, this could be any, this is Derek Chauvin's imaginary chart. Again, we don't have his time of birth, so I just gave him, 6 a.m. as a hypothetical time. But, what you might notice is that, he doesn't have some signs, like he doesn't have anything in Gemini, nothing in Leo or Virgo, but he has something in Libra. He has a good amount of Scorpio, some Sagittarius, nothing in Capricorn or Aquarius, loads of Pisces. So it means that there's emphasis in certain signs, lack of emphasis in others, but still, because those planets rule those particular parts of the chart, they're still instrumental, but they may be a little more subtle or not necessarily as prominent in the life in a certain way. That's why his Mars standing out. Like if we find out he's born, a few hours later or an hour later, like he's born at 7:30 or 8 o'clock, that Mars might likely be here in the 4th house. And that might punch up even what I see his natural aggressive tendencies. He's an aggressive person. Now, how his aggression has manifested, we can see and we now know. But it could be, let's say he was a coworker and you somehow had this chart and you had gotten permission to share this chart with me. That's important, because sometimes people be sneaking things like, I found out his birth time and blah, blah, blah. That's a question of ethics. But let's say I had gotten that information and like, and you worked in an office, a paper factory. It was more like the office, like literally. He's not going to, this is someone who might manifest even passive aggressive tendencies, but still aggressive. There's some way like, I feel like, Derek is undermining me, but then he says I'm not, and blah, blah, blah. Is it possible? Well, this is someone who may have a lot of anger, sometimes prone to envy, especially with some particular things. So now you might say like, well, does that fix that person into that reality for the rest of their lives? No. The key change agent related to all dimensions of a chart, besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is also your consciousness. That the more that you are attentive to yourself and working on yourself, the more that you can change, right? But when you are not, you are just going to fulfill more of these dimensions of yourself that you can't even see.
Wow. Okay. All right. Well, thank you for this.
Mhm.
And happiness or sadness regarding this trial, it's just, before I came here, I was watching this HBO documentary by Raoul Peck about the emergence of white supremacy, and it was so amazing and spot on and disconcerting that that there is an energy that has to not just dominate but destroy everything in its path. For at what end? And I look at the planet. You took over the land, divvied it up, destroyed, killed everybody, and the planet you didn't respect it, because the people that you killed from the continent to this continent, the Americas, understood the balance of nature and how to nurture and plant and move around and, not draw boundaries and not, put people in these tight spaces, but use all of what God has given us. I don't know how we overcome that. It's an energy that's prevalent. It's like locusts. It's like termites. And that energy is very prevalent. I feel it right now. It's like palpable. And,
La luta continua. We have to keep the fight up. You and I talked a little bit about some particular things, like, I want to look at this documentary that you talked about. I told you I don't use the term white supremacy, or I try not to, even though.
Yeah, I used it because that was what
I know, and but it's going to be important to kind of start situating white supremacy as an imperialism that has fit in history and not make them exceptional. The more that we can consciously weaken how they've constructed this model of what they call their reality, from even, the language they use, the West, or even Europe, because many people may not know that the term Europe is, an appropriation of a Greek myth in which Zeus, as a white bull, captures an African princess and takes her into the land of the West, right?
Wow.
And the land of the West. So, and the princess's name, just to be clear, is Europa, right? So and then
Europe is a conquered African.
Correct. And then the idea of the West is making the argument, because that's the land of the setting sun, that Europe is the maturation of humankind, right? Which it isn't, right? And then that the East was given as like, well, you're like kind of more, the babies, you're the incipients of humankind. And here we are as the, the maturation of it, and not giving them that. I think one of the crises, I have a friend who's in the classics. When I say the classics, I mean in terms of classical literature and, study Rome and Greek. We have to kind of divorce Rome and Greece from European history, right? It's like they didn't feel an affinity to you, right? They weren't one of you. You weren't one of them. You just appropriated a culture that wasn't your own, right? As to kind of give yourself a sense of roots. And that's kind of what Europe in its kind of, or Europeans, I should say, in their, push toward dominance have been looking for. And also, things to remind them, like, there were parts of Europe that had that sense of rootedness to the earth, and people who were conquered, like the Irish had it, right? Different parts of Europe, right? That had the sense of connection to their ancestors and respecting their ancestors. I mean, when I say this work reminding, I don't think that should be our primary focus at all. Our primary focus should be us, right? But I think, when we encounter and engage, it's like, yeah, no, that's not true for you.
Right.
That's not
That's
even
what I'm saying. Yeah, I can do all of the work imaginable on being a better human being. And,
right.
But it doesn't change outside unless everyone is committed to that same goal. So.
And we can't be impressed with minor changes.
Yeah.
Like I said, with the police, like, oh, so-and-so got a settlement. I don't care. That's good for them. Right. But I want, complete justice, and I don't want this to happen anymore. Right. There are Black men and women who have been dealing with the police, like myself, for generations. So it needs to end.
Now.
All
right. So Chauvin will be the sacrificial lamb. He will, Samuel Reynolds, be convicted, and now the battle continues, or the
lucha continua.
Fight. Yes. Say it again.
La luta continua.
La luta continuum. All right.
Continua.
Continua, because it's a woman. Okay.
I don't know about that. I think
feminine. Continua. Right. Continue.
Well, I think it's because of la. I mean, from the Latin.
Latin, la is feminine.
Yeah. Right. You're right. That's still correct.
Okay. I appreciate you. And I took 4 years of Latin, and I should know all of that. E pluribus unum. Salve magistra. All right. On that note, I appreciate you, Sam. See you.
Thank you. Good to see you.
You too. Unlockastrology.com. Follow him.
All right. Thank you.